Officer Daniel Reed believed in order the way some men believed in God. Order meant survival. Order meant control. For 15 years, he woke before dawn, pressed his uniform flat, aligned his badge, and drove the same streets of southern Alabama as if repetition could keep chaos away. People trusted him, his supervisors praised him, his neighbors waved. From the outside, Daniel Reed was a man with a solid life and steady hands. Inside, something was eroding. His marriage existed in silence now, conversations reduced to logistics and shared bills. His wife no longer waited up when he worked late. He told himself this was normal, that discipline required sacrifice, that loneliness was simply the cost of responsibility. Still, when night fell, the quiet pressed against his chest harder than any bulletproof vest ever had. On a humid Friday night, after a double shift and a domestic call that ended with a child crying behind a slammed door, Daniel didn't drive home. He turned left instead of right. The neon sign appeared before he consciously decided, pink letters buzzing against the dark highway. Eden's Lounge. He told himself he was just passing through, just one drink. No rules broken, no names exchanged. Inside, the air smelled of perfume, sweat, and desperation masked as glamour. Music thumped low and heavy. Daniel sat alone, uniform jacket off but badge still clipped to his belt, a habit he never questioned. He scanned the room the way he always did, noting exits, hands, shadows. That was when he saw her. She wasn't the loudest dancer or the most exposed. She moved slower, eyes detached, smile controlled. When she looked at him, it wasn't flirtation. It was recognition. As if she already knew something about him. The moment unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Their interaction was brief, no lap dance, no whispered promises. Just a drink placed on the bar and a few words exchanged about nothing that mattered. Yet Daniel felt something shift, a subtle crack in the structure he'd spent years building. When he finally stepped back into the night, humidity clinging to his skin, relief washed over him. He hadn't crossed a line, he still had control. Halfway to his car, his hand brushed his pocket. Paper. Folded. He stopped under a flickering streetlight and unfolded it carefully. Written in neat ink were 4 words. Officer Daniel Reed. No phone number. No signature. Just his name. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the ground tilt beneath him. He glanced back at the club entrance, heart pounding, searching faces through tinted glass. No one followed. No one watched. Yet the certainty remained, heavy and unmistakable. Somewhere deep inside, a voice he had long ignored whispered that order had already begun to fail. Whatever game had started tonight, he sensed he was already part of it, whether he wanted to be or not. Daniel folded the paper again, slower this time, and slid it back into his pocket like evidence he could not log or erase. He told himself he would forget her face, forget the club, forget the note. But as he drove away, his hands trembled on the steering wheel, and control felt suddenly like a lie. He had believed lies before, just never this willingly tonight. Daniel told himself the note meant nothing. By morning, it sat on his kitchen counter like a challenge he refused to acknowledge. He showered, dressed, kissed his wife's cheek as she slept, and left before questions could form. Yet the name on that paper followed him through every red light and radio call, pulsing in his mind like a warning siren he couldn't shut off. 3 nights later, he returned to Eden's Lounge. This time he didn't pretend it was an accident. He sat at the bar, eyes forward, pulse steadying the way it did before walking into a volatile scene. When she appeared, he noticed the same controlled movements, the same distance in her gaze. She recognized him immediately, no surprise, no fear. Just a slight lift of her lips that never reached her eyes. Her name, she said, was Lily. It wasn't delivered flirtatiously. It sounded rehearsed like a detail she offered only when necessary. Their conversation stayed light on the surface. Music, late nights, the strange people who wandered in and out of places like this. But beneath it ran something heavier. Lily listened more than she spoke. When Daniel mentioned his job, she didn't ask questions. She already seemed to understand what the badge meant to him. He told himself that was coincidence. They met again, briefly, then again, always public, always controlled. Daniel never touched her beyond what was unavoidable, never asked for more than conversation. He convinced himself that restraint proved he was still in command of the situation. Lily never pushed. She waited. That somehow unsettled him more. One night, after closing, they stepped outside together. The air was thick, cicadas screaming from the trees. Lily smoked, watching the road like she expected something to come for her. When Daniel asked why she danced, she shrugged. "People like to think they're in control," she said quietly, "even when they're not." The words lingered between them. Daniel felt exposed in a way he hadn't felt since his earliest days on the force. He offered her his number, surprising himself. She accepted without comment. Days passed. Messages came late, never needy, always brief. Lily spoke of nightmares she didn't explain and men she avoided without naming. Daniel found himself checking his phone during shifts, justifying it as concern. He told himself he was helping, that listening wasn't a crime. His supervisors noticed nothing, but something in him had shifted permanently. Sleep came harder, routine weaker, judgment softer, instincts blurred by anticipation and secrecy. Then she crossed the line first. They were sitting in his truck, engine off, rain tapping against the windshield. Lily turned to him and said almost casually, "Your wife works at the dental clinic on Magnolia, right?" The world narrowed. Daniel's breath caught. He had never told her that. Not once. Lily met his stare, expression unreadable, her smile still detached from warmth. "Relax," she added softly. "I just pay attention." Daniel nodded, forcing calm he didn't feel. Somewhere inside, alarms began to sound. He realized then that Lily's smile was never part of the act. It was armor, and whatever she truly wanted from him, she was already closer to it than he understood. Daniel spent the next week convincing himself that fear was an overreaction. Lily knowing where his wife worked didn't automatically mean danger. Small towns bled information. People talked. He repeated these thoughts like a mantra, polishing his badge each morning as if routine could scrub away unease. Still, he didn't stop seeing her. They chose neutral places now, a diner just off the highway, a quiet park where the lights barely worked. Daniel told himself this caution proved he was thinking clearly. Lily never questioned his boundaries. She never asked for gifts or money. She listened. She remembered details he forgot he'd shared. When she spoke, it was often about survival, about learning how to read people before they hurt you. That was how she framed it. Survival. Gradually, without ever asking directly, Lily began to position herself as someone who needed protection. Not the obvious kind. She spoke of men who followed her, of cars that lingered too long. Daniel found himself offering advice, then reassurance, then presence. Each step felt small enough to justify. One night she asked him to run a name. "Just curiosity," she said, eyes down, voice steady. "I want to know if I'm being paranoid." Daniel hesitated. He knew the policy. He also knew how easy it would be. 5 minutes at a terminal, no harm done. He told himself he wasn't helping her evade the law. He was calming a frightened woman. That was what good officers did. The record came back thin. No warrants, no arrests. Daniel told her it was nothing. Lily exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. After that, the requests changed. A patrol car parked too close to her apartment. A noise complaint she didn't trust. She never asked him to intervene directly. She asked what he thought, what he would do. Daniel began answering as a cop and as a man desperate to feel needed. He skipped steps he once followed instinctively. He trusted her instincts over his training. Somewhere along the way, the relationship crossed from secret to dangerous. Daniel's wife noticed the distance growing sharper, the excuses thinner. He deflected with overtime and stress, lying with practiced ease. Lily, meanwhile, grew more intense. Her messages came closer together. Her moods shifted faster. When Daniel didn't respond, she withdrew completely, silence stretching long enough to punish. The power dynamic had shifted, though Daniel refused to name it. One evening, Lily showed him a folded document pulled from her purse. A police report, old and yellowed, stamped with his department's seal. It described an assault from years ago. The victim's name was redacted. "This is why I don't trust cops," she said quietly. Daniel recognized the formatting, the handwriting, the signatures. His stomach tightened. He had never seen this case, but he knew how it ended. No charges, no follow-up. "You could help people like me," Lily added, not accusing, just stating a fact. "If you wanted." The implication settled heavy and permanent. Daniel felt the invisible line under his feet, the one he had sworn never to cross, cracking beneath him. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Lily already knew. Later that night, alone in his cruiser, Daniel stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The man looking back wore a uniform, but carried doubt in his eyes. He realized then that trust had become leverage, and leverage had become expectation. As he pulled out onto the road, his radio crackled with a report of an assault across town. The name of the victim froze his blood. Marcus Hale. Daniel tightened his grip on the wheel, knowing Lily had mentioned that name only once, spoken like a warning she hoped he would remember. Daniel arrived at the hospital before the call officially reached his unit. Marcus Hale lay unconscious, ribs shattered, face swollen beyond recognition. Nurses moved with practiced urgency, but the damage was already written into the man's body. Daniel stood at the edge of the room, unseen, listening as doctors spoke in guarded tones. Severe trauma, blunt force, unknown assailant. It was not his case, yet it felt carved directly into his life. Lily didn't answer his calls that night. When she finally did, her voice was calm, almost distant. She claimed she had been home, sleeping through the chaos. Daniel didn't challenge her. He didn't ask what he already suspected he might not want confirmed. Instead, he listened as she spoke about Marcus like a ghost she could never escape. An old boyfriend, a mistake. A man who believed ownership was love. Fragments of her past surfaced slowly. A childhood marked by instability. Men who took without asking. Systems that closed ranks when she spoke up. Dancing, she said, was never about attention. It was about control, about choosing when to be seen. Daniel absorbed every word, guilt tightening around his chest. He began to see her not as a risk, but as a wound left untreated by the world. Protecting her felt like correcting an old injustice. He ignored the quiet voice warning him that empathy could be weaponized. Marcus survived the beating, barely. Within days, Lily's fear intensified. She jumped at noises, checked locks repeatedly, slept with the lights on. Daniel spent more time at her apartment than he admitted to himself, telling his wife he was covering extra shifts. Lily clung to him now, emotionally if not physically, her dependence subtle but absolute. She never asked him to hurt Marcus. She didn't have to. Daniel pulled records he shouldn't have, tracing Marcus's past. Assault charges that never stuck, complaints that vanished. Each discovery reinforced Lily's narrative. Each file Daniel accessed pushed him further from the man he used to be. He told himself knowledge was not corruption. He was wrong. The department ruled Marcus's assault a robbery gone wrong, no suspects, no urgency. Daniel felt both relief and disappointment, emotions that frightened him equally. Lily watched him closely, studying his reactions, learning how far she could lean without breaking him. One evening she broke down, shaking in his arms, whispering that Marcus would never stop. That men like him always found a way back. Daniel promised she was safe. The words came easily, too easily. 2 hours later, Daniel received another call. Marcus Hale was awake. He was asking questions. He was asking names. Daniel sat alone in his cruiser, engine idling, city lights blurring through the windshield. He understood then that Lily's past was not buried. It was alive, moving, forcing choices. He could feel the next line approaching, darker and more permanent than the others. And this time, he wasn't sure he wanted to stop. The line ahead was clear now, sharp and unforgiving, and Daniel felt himself stepping toward it, knowing once crossed, there would be no return. The night waited ready to demand blood. Daniel stopped pretending he could separate duty from desire. The moment Marcus Hale woke up asking questions, something inside him hardened. Fear mixed with relief, then twisted into resolve. Lily needed him now, not as a listener or comfort, but as a shield, and Daniel wanted to be that shield more than he wanted to be a good cop. He began staying at Lily's apartment longer, sleeping on her couch, then in her bed without acknowledging the shift. Their intimacy was quiet, intense, rooted more in survival than romance. Lily spoke less about love and more about trust. She praised him for understanding her, for seeing what others ignored, each word wrapped tighter around his sense of purpose. Daniel started making choices he would have arrested others for. He warned Lily when patrol patterns changed near her building. He advised her on what to say if questioned. When a noise complaint was logged against her address, he redirected it. Each favor felt justified in isolation. Together, they formed something dangerous. Lily never demanded outright. She framed everything as fear, as necessity, as something only he could fix. His marriage disintegrated quietly. His wife stopped asking where he was. Silence replaced arguments. Daniel barely noticed. His world had narrowed to Lily's safety, Lily's moods, Lily's approval. When she withdrew, he panicked. When she smiled, he felt rewarded. Love had become leverage, and he didn't recognize the transaction until he was deep inside it. Marcus Hale was released from the hospital under observation. He filed no report. That unsettled Daniel more than an accusation would have. Silence meant strategy. Lily sensed it too. She began checking mirrors, changing routes, asking Daniel if men like Marcus ever truly stopped. Daniel assured her with confidence he no longer felt, lying to her and to himself with equal ease. One night, she handed Daniel her phone. "I need you to listen," she said. A voicemail played. Marcus's voice, slurred but clear enough. He spoke her name. He said he remembered everything. He said she owed him. Daniel felt heat crawl up his neck. The message ended with laughter that sounded rehearsed, cruel, and patient, like a man enjoying the slow approach of revenge. Daniel deleted the voicemail before thinking it through. The next day, Internal Affairs sent a routine notice requesting access logs. Daniel's chest tightened, but Lily calmed him with practiced ease. She told him this was what happened when you trusted the system. She told him they only had each other, that loyalty mattered more than paperwork ever could. Then she crossed another line. She asked him to talk to someone, not arrest, not threaten, just scare, just remind Marcus that the world was watching. Daniel said no at first. He meant it. Lily didn't argue. She simply went quiet, distant, cold. That night, she slept facing away from him, leaving the space between them heavy with consequence. Daniel drove for hours, replaying the voicemail, Marcus's laugh echoing in his head. He told himself a conversation wasn't violence. A warning wasn't a crime. By dawn, his decision was already made. He rehearsed words, imagined outcomes, and ignored every rule that once defined him. He no longer recognized where fear ended and desire began inside his thoughts. The uniform felt heavier with every mile. His reflection looked unfamiliar in the glass. Control felt distant now. It was too late. He arranged to meet Marcus at a rundown motel off the interstate. He didn't tell Lily where he was going. He told himself that meant he still had control. As he parked and stepped into the flickering light, Daniel felt the weight of his badge like an accusation pressing against his chest. Inside, Marcus's door stood half open, and before Daniel could knock, he heard Lily's voice inside the room, sharp with fear and fury, followed by a sound that made his blood run cold. Daniel froze in the doorway as Lily's voice cut through the stale motel air. Marcus stood near the bed, shirtless, a fresh bruise blooming along his jaw. Lily faced him, trembling, her hands clenched into fists. The room smelled of sweat, cheap cleaner, and fear. For a second no one moved, then Marcus laughed. "You brought a cop now?" he sneered. "That's how scared you are?" Daniel stepped inside, the door slamming shut behind him. He identified himself automatically, badge flashing under the flickering light. His voice was firm, rehearsed, professional. He told Marcus to calm down, to sit, to listen. The words felt hollow the moment they left his mouth. Marcus ignored him. He stepped closer to Lily, towering, smiling like a man who believed consequences were myths meant for others. Lily backed away until the wall stopped her. Her eyes met Daniel's, wide and desperate. In that look was a plea, sharp and unmistakable. "Get away from her," Daniel said. Marcus turned slowly. "Or what? You gonna arrest me for talking?" Daniel reached for authority, for procedure, but found neither obeying him. Marcus's laughter grew louder, crueler, until Lily screamed. The sound snapped something loose. Marcus lunged. Daniel reacted without thinking, grabbing him, shoving him back. The struggle exploded instantly, bodies colliding, furniture crashing. Marcus swung wildly. Daniel felt a blow connect with his ribs. Pain flared. Rage followed. Lily screamed again. Daniel shoved Marcus hard. He stumbled, hit the edge of the dresser, and fell. The sound was sickening. For a heartbeat, everything went silent except Daniel's breathing. Marcus groaned, trying to rise. Lily stood frozen, hands covering her mouth. Daniel told himself to call it in, to step back, to do it right. Marcus spat blood and laughed. "You think this ends it?" The words burned. Daniel crossed the room, grabbing Marcus by the collar, lifting him halfway off the floor. His hands shook, strength fueled by fear and something darker. Lily moved closer, whispering Daniel's name, not stopping him, not pulling him away. Marcus struggled, then went still. Daniel realized too late how quiet the room had become. He released his grip. Marcus collapsed, head striking the floor. A dark pool spread beneath him, slow at first, then faster. Lily screamed again, falling to her knees. Daniel stared at his hands. They were slick, red. The room seemed to tilt. He dropped beside Marcus, checking for a pulse he already knew wasn't there. His training screamed at him to act, to preserve life, to call for help. His body refused to move. Lily clutched his arm. "He was going to kill me," she sobbed. "You saw it. You had no choice." Daniel wanted to believe her. He wanted the words to erase what he felt settling into his bones. He stood, shakily, backing away from the body. His gun lay near the door where it had fallen during the struggle, visible, undeniable. Sirens wailed somewhere far off. Maybe coincidence, maybe fate. Lily wiped her face, suddenly composed, eyes sharp through tears. "You need to think," she said softly, "about your life, about us." Daniel's chest tightened. He realized then the night had crossed into something permanent. There would be reports, questions, consequences. Nothing he did next would be clean. He reached for his radio and stopped. The red on the floor seemed to spread, filling the room, the future, his mind. Daniel understood with terrifying clarity that this was no longer about saving Lily. It was about saving himself. He knelt again, forcing his training to surface, checking Marcus once more as if repetition could change reality. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing on wet pavement, the world continuing without regard for the man bleeding out on a stained carpet. Daniel imagined the reports, the faces of colleagues, the questions his wife would ask. Each thought felt distant, unreal. Lily's hand squeezed his, grounding him in the moment. Whatever happened next, he knew, would bind them together in ways neither could escape. 17 more words must seal this night, stretching seconds longer, before consequences arrive at dawn. Soon enough. Daniel did not remember standing up, only that he was suddenly moving. His training took over in fragments, instincts fighting panic. He shut the motel door, locked it, then locked it again as if repetition could undo what lay on the floor. Marcus Hale did not move. The blood had slowed, darkening as it soaked into the carpet like a permanent stain. Lily watched him with terrifying calm. "We need to think," she said again, softer now. "You're a cop. You know what to do." That word, cop, cut deeper than any accusation. Daniel stared at his badge, still clipped to his belt, catching the motel light like a lie. He crouched beside Marcus once more, checking for breath, for a pulse, for something impossible. Nothing. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. His radio crackled faintly. Daniel turned it off. He told Lily to sit. She obeyed instantly, folding onto the edge of the bed, hands clasped, eyes fixed on him. He noticed then how little she was shaking, how quickly fear had been replaced by focus. She asked him questions in a steady voice. What time was it? Had anyone seen them enter? Was his gun registered to him? Each question grounded him, while pushing him further down a path he could not retreat from. Daniel wiped his hands with a towel from the bathroom sink, smearing red across white porcelain. He straightened the overturned chair, wiped the doorknob, moved the gun carefully back into its holster. Every action felt rehearsed, as if he were following instructions written long before this night. "You can make this look right," Lily said quietly. "You're good at that." He wanted to deny it. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that there were limits, that procedure would save him. Instead, he opened his notebook and began writing times, observations, details. A report not yet filed but already taking shape in his mind. He chose words carefully: defensive, escalation, threat. Lily watched him like a student studying a teacher. When Daniel finally called it in, his voice was steady. He reported an altercation, a suspect down. He requested medical assistance. He did not mention Lily's name. He did not mention why he had been there. The sirens came faster this time. Daniel stepped back, hands raised, when the first officers arrived. He answered questions calmly, controlled, the way he had 100 times before on other scenes. His colleagues avoided his eyes as they covered Marcus's body. The room filled with murmurs and radios, and the sharp smell of disinfectant failing to mask blood. Lily was taken aside, wrapped in a blanket, speaking softly to a patrol officer. She cried at the right moments. She clutched her chest. She said she was scared. Daniel watched, unable to tell where performance ended and truth began. Internal affairs arrived before dawn. By morning, Daniel was back in his cruiser, uniform stained despite his efforts, badge heavy against his heart. He stared through the windshield, exhaustion crashing into him all at once. Lily's last look before they separated lingered in his mind. Not fear, not gratitude, expectation. Daniel understood then that the blood on the carpet would never truly wash away. Not from the motel room, not from his hands. Whatever came next would not be decided by facts alone, but by who told the story best. As he drove toward the station, lights flashing behind him, he felt the weight of eyes beginning to turn his way, and knew the investigation had only just begun. Detective Rachel Collins arrived after sunrise, when the motel looked ordinary again. She noticed the details others missed: the uneven chair legs, the towel missing from the bathroom rack, the way Daniel Reed stood too straight beside his cruiser. She had reviewed his file before meeting him: commendations, consistency, no complaints worth remembering. Men like that were rarely accidents. Rachel spoke gently, asking Daniel to walk her through the night. His answers were polished, measured, almost textbook. She listened without interrupting, watching his hands instead of his face. They trembled once, then stilled. Control reasserted. Interesting. Inside the motel room, the smell lingered despite the cleaners. Rachel crouched near the bed, eyes narrowing at the angle of the blood spatter. Defensive struggle, maybe, or something else. She made notes without assumptions. Assumptions ruined good cases. She met Lily Monroe in a quiet interview room later that morning. Lily looked fragile, wrapped in borrowed clothes, eyes rimmed red. Rachel introduced herself and waited. Silence had a way of loosening tongues. Lily spoke softly, describing fear, describing Marcus as a shadow that never stopped following. She praised Daniel without exaggeration, calling him calm, protective, brave. Rachel thanked her, but something felt rehearsed, as if Lily knew exactly how much to give and when to stop. Background checks came next. Lily Monroe existed, but only recently. Before Alabama, there were gaps, other names, other addresses that never stayed long. Rachel felt the familiar pull of curiosity tighten in her chest. She reviewed Marcus Hale's history. Violence, intimidation, reports that faded without resolution. A man capable of provoking chaos, certainly. Yet the physical evidence suggested escalation faster than necessary. Rachel flagged the timeline. Daniel's arrival coincided too perfectly with Lily's presence. Too clean, too convenient. At the station, whispers traveled faster than paperwork. A cop involved in a fatal altercation always drew attention. Rachel ignored the noise. She requested access logs, patrol records, phone metadata. Small threads, but threads nonetheless. She noticed Daniel's badge activity spike around Lily's address weeks before the incident. Not enough to accuse. Enough to question. Rachel watched Daniel again during a follow-up interview. He answered everything. He volunteered context. He looked like a man trying very hard to be believed. She recognized that look. It wasn't guilt, it was investment. That afternoon, a clerk from another state called her back. A partial match. A woman resembling Lily had testified under a different name years ago. The case involved coercion, manipulation, a pattern of disappearing just before consequences landed. Rachel felt the pieces shift. She closed the file slowly, aware that truth rarely arrived all at once. Whatever happened in that motel room was only the surface. Below it lay something practiced, something patient. Rachel looked through the glass at Daniel sitting alone, head bowed, hands clasped. She didn't see a monster. She saw a man being pulled somewhere dangerous. And she suspected the woman at the center of it all was already several steps ahead. Rachel made a note to revisit Lily soon, not with accusations, but with patience sharpened by time. She understood predators did not always roar. Some whispered, waited, and let others destroy themselves. As evening settled, she stood by her office window, watching rain streak the glass, considering how easily authority could be bent by affection. Tomorrow she would pull financial records, cell towers, anything that traced unseen movement. The case was breathing now, alive, and she would follow it carefully, knowing pressure revealed truths that force never could alone. 15 quiet steps more remained before certainty, and she intended to take everyone. Slowly, Daniel couldn't sleep. Not after Rachel Collins had started asking questions that lingered longer than they should. Not after seeing her piecing together patterns he hadn't thought anyone would notice. Lily hadn't called. She hadn't texted. For the first time in months, the absence of her voice was deafening. His apartment felt hollow, his bed too large, his uniform hanging like a ghost from the closet. He drove to her place, partly out of habit, partly out of fear. She opened the door with that same calm detachment that had drawn him in from the beginning. No warmth, no pleading, just recognition, a mirror to his own fatigue. She stepped aside without invitation, letting him in. The air smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and perfume, subtle, deliberate. "You need to talk," Daniel said first, more a statement than a question. Lily didn't respond immediately. She walked past him, pausing at the window, watching the street below as if evaluating threats only she could perceive. "I loved you, in my way," she said finally, voice quiet. "But you were never mine to save." Daniel's chest tightened. He took a step forward. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. You think this changes anything?" she interrupted sharply. "You think telling the truth will fix what you've already done?" Her eyes burned, calculating, and for the first time, he felt entirely naked. Not physically, but morally, psychologically, spiritually. His badge meant nothing here. Authority meant nothing. Only truth, or something resembling it, could matter, and even that might be insufficient. He sat down heavily, running his hands through his hair. He confessed everything. Every skipped protocol, every manipulated report, every call that bent rules for her protection, or for his own obsession. He expected relief, redemption, perhaps forgiveness. Instead, Lily leaned closer, studying him. Her expression softened just enough to unsettle him further. "I know," she whispered. "I knew from the beginning. Every step you took, every line you crossed, I watched, I counted, I learned what I could take, and what would bend you." Daniel swallowed. "So? Why tell me now? Why come back?" Her hand brushed against the edge of the table, fingers tapping lightly, rhythmically. "Because confessions don't always save you. Sometimes they just let the other person know how far they can push before you break." Her gaze locked on his, steady and unforgiving. "And I wanted to see you break." The room was silent, except for the hum of the heater. Daniel realized she was measuring his reactions like a scientist, documenting responses, anticipating panic. The intimacy he had imagined between them was an illusion carefully maintained. What he felt as attachment was a trap, disguised as connection. He had protected her. He had obeyed. He had bent rules, compromised integrity, and risked everything. And she had used it all, not for survival, not for love, but for leverage. He wanted to rage, to demand explanation, to reclaim some shred of control. Instead, he found himself silent, defeated, aware that her manipulation had reached its apex. Then she stood abruptly, calm now, like the storm had passed. She left a folded piece of paper on the table, face unreadable. Daniel picked it up with trembling hands. It was a recording device. Her last words before leaving were simple. "Listen carefully. This is the truth you can't tell anyone." Daniel pressed play. Lily's voice filled the room, recounting everything, events, manipulations, and consequences, casting him as both accomplice and pawn. Every word was deliberate, every pause intentional. He listened, stunned, powerless. The confession he had offered meant nothing. She controlled the narrative now, framing him in a story from which there was no escape. When the recording ended, Daniel sat frozen. The realization hit harder than any physical blow. Honesty was not salvation. It was evidence. And Lily Monroe had already anticipated how he would respond. Whatever he did next, he understood with a sudden, terrifying clarity. He was already trapped. The courtroom smelled of polished wood, stale coffee, and tension. Daniel Reed sat at the defense table, badge removed, uniform gone, identity reduced to a man accused. His hands rested on the polished surface, shaking slightly despite weeks of rehearsed composure. Every officer in the room, every journalist scribbling notes, every curious civilian, each represented judgment, distance, and expectation. The trial had become more than legal proceedings. It was spectacle, morality theater, and Daniel was both performer and defendant. Detective Rachel Collins observed from the back, notebook open, mind scanning every interaction, every subtle inflection. She had predicted this escalation, pieced together patterns, and watched the carefully constructed illusion of control crumble before her. Daniel's actions had not been spontaneous. They were methodical, predictable, human, and horrifying. The question was, whether he broke the law. It was how deeply he had been ensnared by someone else's manipulation. The prosecutor began with the incident at the motel. He described the altercation in detail, emphasizing premeditation, negligence, and abuse of authority. Witnesses included motel staff, officers who responded that night, and Lily Monroe, who appeared via video link. Her composure was chilling, every word, every pause carefully delivered to expose Daniel's actions as both tragic and culpable. The narrative painted him as protector, accomplice, and victim simultaneously, a man manipulated but responsible. The jury listened, absorbed, evaluated. The balance of sympathy and condemnation shifted with each witness. Daniel's lawyer spoke next, emphasizing context. Decades of service, commitment to law enforcement, personal vulnerability exploited, decisions made under duress. He humanized Daniel, reminding the jury of fear, loyalty, and the moral gray areas officers navigated daily. He referenced Lily's pattern of deception, carefully implying the premeditated psychological manipulation that had driven Daniel to extremes. Yet the words felt defensive, fragile, floating against the weight of evidence, the cold truth of Marcus Hale's death, and the damning recording Lily had left. The trial was a meticulous dance. Questions dissected motive, sequence, and intent. Each answer Daniel gave was measured, but even the calmest statement carried tremors. He described the night of the altercation, the fear, the impossibility of choices. The courtroom absorbed it, part horror, part fascination. He could feel eyes flick between skepticism and pity, every juror weighing fact against perception, morality against legality. The defense introduced character witnesses, colleagues, former supervisors, all speaking of Daniel's discipline, honesty, and service. But the weight of the motel room, the manipulation, and the recording pressed relentlessly, pulling the narrative toward inevitable judgment. The public, hearing the details, could barely distinguish between hero and villain. The line blurred until moral clarity became a luxury no one could afford. Lily's testimony via recording returned repeatedly in Daniel's mind. Calm, measured, unyielding. Every word emphasized control, consequence, and the power she had wielded. She framed him as both protector and pawn, leaving no room for redemption, no path to innocence. Daniel realized the trial wasn't about legal guilt alone. It was about the narrative she had constructed, the story she would tell, and the world that would believe it. Days stretched into weeks. Jury deliberations were tense, private. Daniel remained isolated in his thoughts, haunted by every choice, every act that led him here. He replayed conversations, confessions, manipulations, realizing that truth and justice were not always aligned. Authority and morality were distinct, and he had existed in both worlds without clarity, unprepared for consequences. Finally, the courtroom cleared, leaving Daniel seated alone, staring at the empty chairs where Lily's presence lingered like a shadow. Rachel Collins filed her last notes, the air heavy with unfinished justice, unresolved tension, and lingering questions about accountability, manipulation, and survival. Daniel understood, with crushing certainty, that the verdict, whatever it would be, was only a milestone, not an ending. Outside, Alabama's sun gleamed, indifferent, signaling the next act in a story that was far from over. And somewhere, unseen, Lily Monroe's influence persisted, waiting to define the final chapter. Daniel sat alone in his cell, the faint hum of fluorescent lights above like a pulse he couldn't quiet. Weeks had passed since the trial, since the courtroom had dissected every choice, every hesitation, every line he had crossed. The verdict was guilty, though the sentences and appeals were still being processed. The weight of the badge he once wore felt distant, irrelevant, a relic of a life that no longer existed. What lingered wasn't punishment. It was betrayal, calculated, patient, and devastating. Lily Monroe had disappeared. No address, no calls, no messages. She had left nothing behind except the recording that condemned him and the knowledge that she had anticipated every response he might make. He realized, finally, with painful clarity, that trust had been the weapon wielded against him. Every favor he granted, every compromise he accepted, every moment he believed he was protecting her, she had orchestrated it to ensure his fall. His love, his loyalty, his instincts had become chains. He thought about the nights they had spent together. The quiet dinners, the shared laughter, the moments when she had feigned vulnerability. Every smile, every whispered word, every fragile moment had been strategy. Daniel had been a pawn, manipulated by a brilliance he had underestimated until it was too late. Even his moral compass, finely tuned over decades, had been turned against him. Detective Rachel Collins had visited him once, her presence measured, clinical. She didn't offer solace, she didn't lecture. She observed, made notes, and asked pointed questions about the trial, the evidence, the gaps that Lily had left. Rachel's methodical approach reminded him that truth existed independently of perception, but justice could be swayed by manipulation, circumstance, and timing. Daniel had been schooled harshly in that reality. As the days bled into nights, Daniel's mind replayed the final moments with Lily. Her words had been deliberate, her voice calm, as if she were narrating events for an audience that only she could see. She had framed him not as hero or villain, but as participant, complicit, capable, yet deceived. He understood that her control had never been physical alone. It had been psychological, emotional, relentless. Trust had been the weapon, and he had wielded it willingly. Then the postcard arrived. It was unsigned, postmarked Alabama, with 3 simple words in handwriting that made his chest tighten. You almost understood. Daniel turned the card over again and again, searching for hidden clues, for some remaining hint of location or intent. There was none. Only the reminder that she had vanished, undefeated, and that her story was far from over. She had disappeared without a trace, leaving him to sit with the consequences of choices he had believed were his own. He recognized then that closure was an illusion. Control was ephemeral. Trust was the final weapon, and he had been its target from the first night he met her. Sitting in silence, he traced the edge of the card with a finger, imagining the calm precision of Lily plotting from somewhere beyond reach. He understood fully that no amount of confession, loyalty, or compliance would have changed the outcome. She had orchestrated the game, assigned roles, and written rules he could not see. Every act of protection, every compromise of duty, every surrender of moral certainty had played directly into her plan. Daniel had been defeated, not by violence, but by the subtle, unrelenting power of psychological mastery. In the quiet of the cell, he closed his eyes. The lesson was clear, brutal, unyielding. In the battle of control and deception, the mind can be weaponized far more effectively than any badge or authority. Trust, given freely, had been his undoing. And somewhere, out there in the world, Lily Monroe continued to move, waiting, watching, unbound, her influence lingering like a shadow that would never fully lift.